Jane Smith, thank you for coming in to talk to Central Coast newspapers about the public inquiry report into the state of Central Coast Council. What was your initial reaction to the release of the report?
Well, I think most people expected the result. It seemed to be a predetermined result. But nonetheless, it's disappointing that the state government, the minister, has seen fit to remove local democracy from our Central Coast community.
It is unsure when elections will be held. We've asked the major players. There doesn't seem to be an answer to that. What is your feeling? What will happen?
Well, the reports seem to suggest that the minister is interested in having an election this year, and certainly the administrator in one of his previous resolutions again recommended that an election be held this year. It's not binding though, so we don't really know when the election will be held, and it's difficult to really understand what the criteria is to bring on the election. Is it about the administrator getting through all the things that the state government wants him to get through? And I think the community should be concerned about that. Or is it really about restoring democracy to the Central Coast?
You and your fellow councillors, the 13 that were left after 2 resigned, were summarily suspended around about 20 months ago now. What was your initial reaction to that suspension? Were you surprised?
Well, again, I wasn't surprised because I think the state government has form on this. I suppose disappointed again. For me, the fundamental thing here is the representation of our community. Councillors are elected to represent the interest of residents, ratepayers and the community, and it's clear that we've lost that under administration. So the minister had choices. You know, they could have put in a performance improvement order that is binding, that means councillors have to meet certain criteria and outcomes. The minister could have put in the financial advisor that she promised on the 6th of October and the HR advisor that never happened. So it was disappointing the state government went to suspension and have now gone to declaring positions vacant.
The second administrator, the first in this period, Dick Person, pointed out in several media that he was not surprised that the councillors were suspended, and he labelled it as the biggest disaster in council history, quoting a very large debt. What do you say to that?
Well, Mr. Person threw out big numbers, and I think even Professor Graham Sanson really broke that down for the community. So this big figure of 565 million, over 300 of that was prior debt from Gosford and Wyong Council, and not even bad debt. You know, most councils have debt. So over 300 million of that was inherited from the former councils. Over 100 million is this issue about staff using restricted funds without approval. And again, the Crown Solicitor has come out and said, well, there's a question about whether that really has been wrong and whether it needs to be repaid. And then the remaining amount is deficits. And certainly no business, no organisation wants to be running deficits. But even the independent experts on AREC, in their testimony at the inquiry, said those deficits were not a problem. They did not see them as a problem, and it's just important, or it is important of course, that you have a plan to get out of deficit, which is what our long-term financial plan was showing.
The AREC, which is the Audit Risk Committee, was chaired by a very senior ex-public servant, Nicole Gallatley. Why didn't they warn you and the councillors and the General Manager, presumably, about the problems that the state governments saw?
So there's 2 schools of thought here. So firstly, I suppose there's terms of reference. They are looking at the audited financial statements and not the other end, the budget process. And they do look at systemic, risk and audit and procedures. But I agree that they should have picked it up. So I sat in on one of their meetings when I was mayor, and I saw the members of AREC grill the auditor about things in the draft audited financial statements. They're very competent people, very expert people, and they were asking very specific questions about the audit. AREC then recommends to Council whether that audited financial statement should be signed off. And so in every case they did, ultimately. So it is surprising, and I'm not suggesting they did anything wrong, but what I am saying is if they didn't see the problems, it is unrealistic, or perhaps impossible, for 13 or 15 councillors to see problems that auditors and experienced accountants have not picked up.
You had some very experienced councillors, or at least by years, on council. Why didn't they pick these things up, or did they?
Well, look, I'm not aware that they did. I know some councillors claim that they knew, which is surprising because surely if they did know, they would have gone through appropriate channels to get meetings with the CEO, get meetings with the Mayor at the time, whoever that was, and none of that happened. Again, I suppose one of the challenges is that this is a really big council, and I know people just see the headlines and perhaps don't understand the complexity behind it. It was more than a full-time job for most councillors to keep on top of the information. But even separate to that, on any board of directors, the role of the board is to make decisions based on the information that they receive, interrogate it, of course, ask questions, drill down, set strategic direction, manage risk, all of those things. But you're relying on the information that you are provided with. And the Commissioner noted in her report on a number of occasions that staff, the information that councillors were presented with was not sufficient.
Though ultimately, like a board of directors, do you accept responsibility for the situation as it came to a head 20 months ago?
Look, I really take on board the comments about councillors should have been acting more quickly. I absolutely take that on board, and you know, in retrospect, you can see some of that. But as I said at the beginning, this figure of 565 million is not an accurate reflection of what the real issue is. The real issue was about budget deficits and making sure that we had a plan to get out of those deficits. Now, I will say that in 2020, the CEO at the time engaged Grant Thornton because of the impact of COVID and to look at the financial sustainability of council. So there was work starting there. In reading the Commissioner's report, the executive staff got information before the councillors did that was not passed on as quickly as I think it should have been. When Grant Thornton did a workshop with councillors, which was about looking at our next budget, they identified a number of levers that councillors should be thinking about in terms of correcting or safeguarding the council's financial sustainability. The councillors asked the staff to identify $233 million of actions that we could look at in terms of going forward. So it might have been ways of getting more income, or it might have been ways of saving money. Now, those actions weren't intended to be put in place straight away, but they were actions that council could then look at rolling out as we saw what the impact of COVID was.
Now, the council finances were strained, particularly as Mr Murphy sat here and said after the IPART decision, where water rates actually went down and therefore starved council of many millions of dollars. Was that a turning point, and is this the point where you think you could have acted quicker?
Well, in retrospect, perhaps that is a fair comment. But again, I reflect on what actually happened, and I think it was in June 2019, I might have the date wrong, but the staff provided a briefing to councillors about the IPART decision and the impact of that on our budgets. And they had identified things that they were doing to offset some of that, the result that we weren't expecting. They were looking at deferring projects, they reduced some operational costs, and other things like that. Now, it wasn't enough, and I think that is the point. It wasn't enough. Our deficit still did increase. But again, I come back to the independent ARIC members who said the deficits for those 3 years in themselves were not a significant issue for an organisation this size, or should not have been. So yes, that is one of the areas where if we could do it again, we would have gone harder. But it's not right to say that council and councillors did not do anything.
The accounts to do with the Water Authority, what was once the Water Authority, is in-house, in council. We look through that, and most of the debt that is being referred to seems to be tied up in the Water and Sewerage Authority that doesn't directly have anything to do with council. Is this a problem? Other actors have pinpointed that this is an issue for the council finances.
Yeah, so look, the relationship with the Water Authority is a complex thing that I think everybody acknowledges needs to be addressed. So, you know, part of the issues around the use of restricted funds were that the monies held in the Water Authority funds, the water, sewer and drainage, were treated as unrestricted, and maybe they should have been treated as restricted. So that's an ongoing problem, and there is not a clear answer at this point. The Commissioner hasn't come up with a clear answer. But what there does seem to be is a movement to bringing the operations of the water function under the Local Government Act. I was pleased that a couple of meetings ago Mr Hart suggested this. On face value it looks like a good move, but with the Water Authority still being regulated by IPART, because that gives the community some avenue to ensure that as prices are set, that there is a valid process, an opportunity for input, an opportunity for submissions.
Some in the community, notably the Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, have suggested to sell it all off and use the money for things that are required around there. Is there an appetite for that, do you think?
Well, I don't think so. I don't think the community wants it. And again, I'm pleased that the Administrator has ruled that out. I hope that he's true to his word in that. His is purely a pragmatic view and a financial view where the value of the assets, we would not, or the community would not get that value in a sell-off, and so it would be counterproductive. Even above that, I think water is an essential service and it needs to be owned by the Central Coast community.
On to other recommendations. There are 8 recommendations in Ros McCulloch's report. Some that stand out were compulsory or mandatory, I think were words, were training for incoming councillors. What did you think about the education level, or the skill level of the councillors in the chamber, the 15?
Yeah, well, look, there was a wide variation, and you know, I believe that councillors should be from the community. You know, there's a benefit in councillors coming from the community, so I wouldn't be, you know, in favour of an entirely professional, hand-picked council. I think one of the problems I saw is that many of the new councillors probably had never seen a council meeting before. Rightly or wrongly, I'd been attending council meetings for almost 20 years, and I'd seen Gosford Council, I'd seen Wyong Council, and even some of Lake Macquarie Council meetings. So I had a really strong view and understanding of, in my view, the role of councillors and how council meetings should run. I think a lot of our new councillors had probably never seen a council meeting, and with a period of 17 months of administration, did not have that opportunity when they were thinking about running for council. Now, that's going to be the same next time round. We're under administration. We don't have a council meeting run by elected representatives where people thinking about running for council can actually go and watch and get an understanding of the dynamics and what happens.
So we may be in for a repeat of what happened, as far as at least the somewhat disruptive style that council did have in its first term. How do you create a culture where the community can re-establish trust in the councillors and the council more generally?
Well, I do think it's going to be challenging. I mean, certainly, I agree that the conduct of the council laws was unbecoming, I guess is a generous way of saying it, but it was quite, disruptive in many ways. Now, again, it's not unique to Central Coast Council. But what I would say, and certainly I put it in my submissions, is that I think there does need to be stronger enforcement of code of meeting practice. Mayors have limited scope. They have power to run a meeting, but there are limits. And so I put in my proposal that I almost think there should be an external body that can review council meetings, almost like your football code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. With sin bins and so on.
Well, yeah, I think, I know it sounds, there's a lot more that would need to be thought through, but I really think it's been a weak system. Nobody wants to be sending off code of conducts all the time, but when you know they're not enforced, when you know there's no consequence, it makes it very difficult to generate the behaviour and the culture that you want.
Now, you put a lengthy submission to the Commissioner. Are you going to make that public?
Yes, I am now. Now that the final report is out, I will be putting that up on my website. I did a lengthy submission. I also did one during the public hearing, and then I did a response, a submission in reply. So I do want to make that information public because I don't think the Commissioner has really been provided a very thorough report for our community. It restates a lot of the already known information. I was disappointed there wasn't more analysis, and I was also disappointed that the Commissioner didn't consider options before she made her recommendations. So I am, keen to put my submissions out there. I think for anybody that is considering running for council, they're long submissions, but it might be worth having a read.
Do you think that the terms of reference that the Commissioner was given were sufficient for her to make recommendations?
Well, I think there was scope, in particular in the last terms of reference, that basically said any other matter that might affect confidence in the council. But I was disappointed that the Commissioner did not seem to take that up. She, in her final report, seemed to stick to a very narrow terms of reference. And I heard a local government expert the other day say that it was clear that those terms of reference were written by somebody that wanted the council dismissed.
Well, now that you are formally dismissed by the state government and the local government minister, where to now? You've helped form the Friends of Democracy here on the Central Coast to presumably try and get local democracy back. What are your plans going forward?
Yeah, so the Friends of Democracy, I initiated that almost 12 months ago, and it really is about getting the community activated in their area. So it's not a political vehicle for anybody. It's not aligned to any political party. It's about supporting communities and getting their voice heard. And so I'm very keen to continue that work. In terms of me personally and where I go to, well, I'm going to spend some time reflecting on that. I think everybody's, had a bit of needs a bit of time just to reflect on what's happened. But what I do know is that I've been working for over 20 years for the community, through various avenues, and I will be continuing to do that in some way.
Now, in closing, a bit of a red herring, the question about a popularly elected mayor. Would a popularly elected mayor, like in Newcastle or Wollongong or Sydney City, would that, do you think, on the Central Coast work?
Well, again, I think last time when I gave this some thought, I said that there are two sides to that coin. I think at this point in time it would be, well, if I go back to our 15 councillors, I don't think a popularly elected mayor would have made a difference in that situation. As in other councils, if you have the support of your councillors, then you succeed. But if you're a popularly elected mayor, voted in by the community but the other councillors don't support you, then it is the same level of conflict that, you know, we've seen in other areas. So at this point in time, I perhaps don't think a popularly elected mayor is the right thing. Maybe down the track, when there is more confidence restored back in our council, that's a good time to have that conversation.
All right, well, thank you, Jane Smith, ex-mayor, first mayor of the Central Coast, ex-councillor. Thanks for speaking with Central Coast Newspapers.
All right, thank you.